Hello, and welcome to the Divorced Dadvocate, divorce support for dads, where we help dads create a healthy and less traumatic divorce. My name is Jude Sandoval, and I'm your host. I created this podcast in the Divorced Advocate community as a result of my own high conflict divorce, and because you as a dad deserve all the resources necessary to thrive through this challenging time. I encourage you to check out our website at thedivorcedadvocate.com, where there are resources that correspond to this episode, as well as free access to our membership community, where you will find live meetings, free workshops and courses, private discussion groups, and more. And now, on to this week's episode.
Our topic today is one that we don't hear too much about in the realm of dads and males, and that is around really gaining control of and getting back into empowering yourself in the divorce process. And so I've got a phenomenal guest today that's going to help us wrap our arms around that and understand a little bit about that, particularly from a very unique perspective that, as far as I'm concerned, I've met nobody else that can provide this unique perspective. But before I introduce him, I do want to give a couple of show notes. And the first is the Divorced Advocate app is at the Apple Store and the Android Store. So go to the divorcedadvocateapp.com and download that, or you can go to the website at divorcedadvocate.com and click on Get the App page. Lots of great resources there, so download it as soon as you can. And then the second is the divorce quiz. Find out where you're at in your divorce compared to others who have gone through it. It takes about 10 minutes. It's going to spit out some specific results in 5 different categories that we can review together for free. That's at the website as well under the divorce quiz, or you can find that at thedivorcequiz.com. Again, great resources. Please take advantage of both of those. And now on to our next awesome resource, which is our guest today. And Will Kesselman is a special victims investigator, social impact strategist, speaker, and founder of Control and Power Strategy, a domestic violence, divorce consulting, and trauma coaching agency. After experiencing his own trauma both at home and in school, Will chose to dedicate his life and professional career to protecting those who've had their power wrongfully snatched from them. With over 15 years of experience, Will continues to dedicate his life by helping empower people to protect themselves and their children. He specializes in revealing to his clients the hidden information known mostly to government investigators, police, and judges. That's the unique perspective that I was talking about. He's helped thousands of people navigate government and community systems and has recently been featured on major media outlets for his expertise. Please help me in welcoming Will Kesselman. Will, welcome.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you.
I'm like I told you in the intro before we were talking here and when we were chatting, I'm really excited your background and when we talked, I think it was last week, and I've been thinking over this for the week, and your background and the expertise that you have and all that you do is going to give some really unbelievable feedback to a lot of guys that really feel isolated in what they're going through because they feel like, well, this isn't happening to other guys, because we hear about a lot of this happening from the perspective of women, and we hear it in the news, and we hear all of it from the perspective of empowering women and protecting women, and which is a great thing. Let's not diminish that at all, because that's incredibly important. That's a good thing that's happened in society, but we have not heard much from the flip side of that. And so what we're going to talk about today is around that perspective, from a dad's perspective. But before we really dive into it, share with us a little bit about yourself and your background and really how you got into this work.
Sure. Again, thank you for having me. I truly appreciate it. I treat every privilege, every podcast, anything as a privilege, even like it's my first. So again, thank you for that. And a bit about me, I guess. So like you mentioned in the intro, I did have, everyone has situations where they have to overcome them as a child or adulthood or whatever.
Yep.
And so for myself, I have had my own situations as a child. That's why I chose to do what I do in terms of the special victims, investigations and try and help those who have been disempowered. My personal thing is I think everyone should have equal power and no one should have their power voice snatched from them. That's just my personal thing. And you can call it irony, I guess, or strange thing, but it happens all too often. And when I say this, you'll be like, wait a second, I know a few people like this. And what happened was I ended up marrying a narcissist. Now, she was not diagnosed, but whether it's therapists, whether it's police or whatever, it happens a lot where people who we think they should know better, or they know a lot more, or they have some crystal ball, or whatever the case is. In my case, I didn't. And again, it's about emotions, really. We get carried by our emotions. We don't always see things clearly. So I ended up marrying a narcissist, and I'm divorced now for give or take 6, maybe 7 years at this point. And so that's where I really started to zero in, not just on understanding CPS or child welfare, or whichever, because there's different acronyms wherever a listener is, right? It goes by county and by state. So you have, DCF and DCFS and this and that, whatever, and CPS and so on and so forth. I don't want to list all 10 of them, so to speak. But there's that. There's also, understanding the police and how a person can get, let's use the word railroaded, if I may, by those and more, even whether it's divorce or anything else, a therapist, you have a person went to get help, they have a therapist, and all of a sudden they're crazy because they have a therapist, yet they were trying to get help in the first place. And now they're being sort of railroaded again by yet another system, so to speak. So all these things to me, it hurts. Honestly, it hurts that someone gets sort of, what happens is things get flipped on them that shouldn't be in the first place. And there's ways, in my opinion, to sort of push it back or, take control of that narrative again, so that the outcome, whatever we're talking about, whether it's child welfare, whether it's divorce or whatever the case is, although I've specialized like you have basically in divorce. And so, there's a way in which to control that narrative. Now, again, reasonable outcomes. No one can guarantee everything. Right. And, part of a negotiation involves giving a bit and so on and so forth. But ultimately, there are certain things that a person should never have to give up, let's say. It shouldn't be a child goes to the abusive parent, whether it's verbally, psychologically, or even physically abusive, and there's unsupervised contact. There's ways in which to really address that kind of stuff, and so on and so forth. So there's a lot to me in terms of experiences and, circumstances that have taught me to sort of fight and think and help and, support. But ultimately, it's really about making sure people have their voices and have their power, and that it's equal. No one should be above anybody else, even if they're trying to get their power back. It shouldn't be that they take more of it. It should still be equal, and it still ensure a person's safety. And if there are children involved, then their children's safety as well. Right,
and I think that we can, and everybody listening can agree with that premise, is that there should be equal power. Nobody should be disempowered or not have the opportunity to do that. And sometimes we disempower ourselves, and that's maybe something that we get into and we'll probably get into. But so your background in your personal life, which was having the experience of going through a divorce and and a relationship that was unhealthy with somebody had a disordered personality, and then having that dynamic. But tell a little bit about your professional background too, which really gives you the unique perspective of how you do what you do, because we talk a lot on the show, and all the men that we talk to, and my experience has been like it's a challenge in this system. The system is very, very challenging, and your background provides a unique perspective in that and how to mitigate that.
Yeah. So thank you. So I have, so what I do is very unique in that people say, originally I'm Canadian, for example. So people say, well, why don't you go back to Canada? Canada has health insurance, all these good things and everything else. I'm like, because I wouldn't have the skills, the purview to do what I do. So even though the division I work for is from the child welfare division, okay, However, what we do is we do take on cases, and New York State has this, you can check this out and so on and so forth, where we do sex and human trafficking cases. We do sex abuse cases and so on and so forth. Whereas other jurisdictions may not have those more, I guess, extreme or intense purviews. And for myself, I work nights and weekends for an immediate response, incident response division. And that's all I've been doing since 2017. And you can't just necessarily start there. They've changed it recently because there was some staffing issues. But ultimately, you had to put in at least 5 or 10 years to be able to get to where I am in terms of the division that I work for. And so all I see all day, or all night technically, is the heavy of the heavy. Right. So we're in ERs a lot of the time. We're in buildings doing, more intense investigations to try and figure out, what exactly happened and who we can protect. Obviously, we can't force someone to be protected, but ultimately we can frame things and explain things. And if the person sees it that way, then great. If they don't, they don't. We give them some information, or a lot of information, depends on circumstances. And they can, call resources. They can call for therapy. They can call for different types of assistance and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. So it depends. And part of what I do, just to get a bit more specific, is we literally, again, this is from midnight to 8. So we're like going when things are quiet and can be way more dangerous, or far more dangerous. And we're knocking on doors, we're trying to make entry, and we're trying to assess what's going on. Sometimes while things are going down, especially till 3 a.m, especially in the summer, 4 a.m, people are still awake. Things are still happening. People are pushing, shoving, hitting, being inappropriate verbally, psychologically, emotionally, so on and so forth. And so we're literally walking in to, as I call, the fire as it's happening. And we have to first sort of calm things down, separate things a little bit, get some information, and then see where we can help, where we can offer some information, or to insist that those who are being abused or attacked or whatever the case is, that they would have to go somewhere else. Otherwise, their safety is at risk. And then there's other protocols and procedures in place. So, that's been what I do. And so part of, I guess, my uniqueness is that I understand, I don't do the diagnosis stuff, but I understand patterns and behaviors. That's where I sort of focus in, right? Mm-hmm. So, whether it's my ex in terms of her patterns and behaviors, or she was never diagnosed, or whoever I interview, it's been hundreds of people who are quote unquote narcissists, quote unquote abusers. And so I understand their patterns and behaviors. And by understanding that, I can sort of take that sort of all those pieces and then empower, in this case, a client through my private consulting coaching agency and say, look, this is how they're going to react. They've reacted this way in the past. They're going to react this way in the future. This is how you're going to fight it this way, or how I suggest you fight it this way or this way or this way, depending on what the deal is. And then you have all these pieces now in terms of how child welfare might be involved, or the police are involved. You're going to approach it in this way, or I suggest you should approach it in these few ways, and combine together. This is your plan, but let's also take care of the fears and so on and so forth. Because as you know, the best laid plan doesn't happen because there's fears, limiting beliefs, and everything else, which is also part of my expertise and understanding by being in the home.
Right. So I just
see everybody.
So I wanted to sum that up a little bit.
Sure.
You're a special victims investigator. So you see this stuff in intimate detail. So and that's the emphasis I want to make is, excuse me, when we're going through this, oftentimes as dads, and this is both sides of the coin, right? But we're speaking, we feel like we're isolated in this, and anybody that we talk to really does not know and understand what we're going through, whether that's false allegations, or there's parental alienation, or there's just flat out abuse. You have the perspective of having been in the middle, in the mix of that, and understanding then the process that happens with the legal system, with documentation, with evidence, with everything else that needs to be done in this process in order to move forward in defending yourself, probably maybe initially, but eventually coming to an outcome that is empowering for you, in that you're garnering the parenting time that you deserve with your kids. Because as a dad, again, this goes back to, I would say, a lack of emphasis on the importance of fathers in kids' lives, et cetera. So So couple that with your experience personally then, and having gone through this with somebody in a dynamic that was similar in your personal life, this perspective is amazing. And so what I would like to start with then is what are some important things when a dad, and we're gonna approach this from the perspective of the dads, because as the dads are listening,
absolutely,
when they are faced with maybe a false allegation to start out with, or some parental alienation, or an adverse situation where they've got somebody that, okay, we don't really need to have a diagnosis. We don't really need to know or make assumptions around the intent, but the actions are something that is disempowering them and risking their ability to have a relationship with their children. What is the important first steps for them to start to do?
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Hey, this is Jude with a quick reminder about the Divorced Advocate Foundation for Fathers, which is our nonprofit that helps dads through divorce with legal education, free or reduced cost coaching, and mental health resources. If you own a business or know someone who does, there's an easy way to help by connecting credit card processing through our partner program. Part of the fees go straight to the foundation with no added cost to the business, and 98% of businesses are actually able to save money on their processing fees. It's a win-win. So if you know a business that accepts credit cards, get them in touch with me by sending a warm introduction email to jude@thedivorcedadvocate.com, or give me a call directly at 720-255-1021.
Okay, so there's a couple of things that come to mind. So the first thing is to understand that whether it's the investigator or child welfare or even detectives, right? Because I work with detectives a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And so while there are things that they may want to do, they can't necessarily do them because they're bound by protocol, they're bound by procedure, they're bound by law. Okay. And sometimes the law is so dry, not cut and dry, but so dry that there isn't leeway. Okay, it depends on the investigator or whatever, and how things can go. But ultimately, assume that the law is extremely dry. And so sometimes your parent, those listening, I'm not saying to take matters into their hands. What I'm saying is they need to take control of the narrative. That's one of the most important things that I can say. And to do that means to get ahead of it. That does not mean, for example, with child welfare, because child welfare is one of the stickiest ones of all of them, especially if you look at the laws, state laws and everything else. Most states give child welfare a lot of rope and a lot of purview and a lot of power.
Mm-hmm.
And in a lot of states, not many, well, it's decreasing, but in a lot of states, there hasn't been traditionally a push to include men in their investigations. They go, okay, well, the mom's usually the caretaker, so we'll go talk to mom, go talk to the kids, go to the schools, get the health records and so on and so forth. And if dad shows up, no big deal. However, more and more, there's been a huge push in a lot of states, not just a few, but like a lot of states, to include the father, because legally, federally, legally, they're supposed to. If the father's on the birth certificate, or if the father's married to the child, married to the mom really, and the child came during that time period, the father must be included. So there's blessings and curses to that. Blessing is that the investigator on the child welfare side, criminal usually does their thing a bit more streamlined, but on the child welfare side of it, they should be reaching out. So as a father, if you're a father and you're involved with that, don't be shy in talking to them. That does not mean answering all their questions. That does not mean thinking that they're your friend. That does not mean sort of taking a very chilled out approach to child welfare. It just means make sure they know who you are. And if they haven't reached out and the investigation is halfway through, and most investigations now for most states is 60 days, give or take. Okay. It's very rare that it's 90 days. It's usually 60 days now. There's a few states that they still hold on to 90, give or take, but it should be 60 in most states.
So what I'm hearing you say, Will, is that if there's some allegation, or if there is some kind of parental alienation, or you feel like something, don't wait. Don't bury your head in the sand. don't take a wait and see approach. That you need to be proactive and you need to start to do something in this process, and that's because there's a limited time frame, and then there's going to be, once that limited time frame expires and they've come up with a report or an assumption or something else, and then you're potentially behind the eight ball in having to address these issues, whereas you could have addressed them up front, right?
It's actually even worse than that. So yes, 60 days is that overall thing, but they are going with what's called a paradigm as early as 3 or 4 days in.
Oh, wow.
I'm serious now. Yeah. Their paradigms start 3 or 4 days in. By the 7th day, some tops 14th day, they've made an initial assessment that gets reviewed by a supervisor and or 2 or 3 levels of supervision, signed off and everything as to the course of action that an investigator is going to be taking. And this is just child welfare alone. On the criminal side, it's a bit not as formal, but they do kind of have those kinds of paradigms and hypotheses is the word I wanted to use. And so it's important to remember that. So again, when it comes to child welfare, it's important to control that narrative because, again, with alienation, for example, okay, and with divorce cases especially, whether it's a male who's a perpetrator or a female who's a perpetrator. But in this case, we're talking about men who are the dads, men who are good parents. We're not talking about, the small percentages of those who may not be as on the up and up. And for those who want to be in their kids' lives, and I always try to help those fathers in terms of as an investigator or as a consultant, and traditionally men have not been, and they've been kept out, and we can debate that a whole other time, but you really want to be involved, and you're allowed to tell the investigator, hey, you didn't include me for the first 30 days. You didn't include me for the first 45 days. You didn't do this, that, or whatever it is. It does not mean you're pointing out their faults or flaws. You're simply trying to throw a little bit of guilt, a little bit of guilt in terms of the investigator, because then you can try and reshape that narrative by saying, hey, look, talk to me. I'm here to talk to you. I'm here to be honest and open. They're going to have their narrative set in their mind from the woman's perspective or other family or the foster care family or neighbors or whoever, right? And, if someone says, hey, dad, you were abusive physically, emotionally, whatever, you got to get on top of that. You got to get a whole bunch of people to reframe and corroborate your side of the story. Because if you don't, then you're going to be sort of labeled as a certain way. And if it does eventually go to divorce, let's say, for example, 3 or 4 years down the road, at the time you're like, well, okay, I'm still in a decent relationship with the woman, no big deal. But if it changes, courts can ask child welfare and other agencies to go back into the records and do what's called a court report, or there's other words for it too, and then provide a court report to that judge, to that court. And so you don't want someone saying the summary of that investigation was dad was the abuser. Dad did X, Y, Z. Dad had all these issues. Dad never came. Dad never did the service plan. Dad never did the services he had to do, whether it's anger management or whatever it is. Even if you're falsely accused, there's ways to handle it. So you're not doing 6-hour days of counseling and everything else and losing your job and losing your house and whatever. There's ways to take care of those pieces. But you as a male in this case really need to be on top of these things, because there are implications down the road, especially if there's multiple cases, one case and the next and the next and the next, leading up to a divorce, foster care, or whatever. You don't want that narrative being negative against you.
Right. There's a domino effect.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah. So let's stop there real quick, because I just want to emphasize this to the dads that are listening, because I have multiple clients, and it's sad for me to say this, multiple clients that are dealing with exactly what you just described, because whether they were in pre-divorce or they were in the middle of their divorce, they thought, oh, she would never do that, or I can work this out, or this is the one, and look, I'm altruistic too, is like the truth will come out, right? That's one that it doesn't. That's not always true. Okay, this system is not. It's not structured for the truth to come out. So it is incumbent upon you, if this is happening, and I'm so glad you said 3 or 4 days, because the ones that I work with put this off for months, and then they haven't seen their kids for a year or 2 years, and now, like you said, there's a domino effect, and then you're trying to dig out of something that if you 3 or 4 days into it, or even a week or two into it, you started to take initiatives around this, that you would be way ahead. And and I'm not faulting any of the men, because this is really, really hard to step up, especially when you're alone, especially when you've never gone through this, especially when you don't know what support. And that's why I want to highlight this, and that there are people like you, Will, that are out there. There's people like our community that are out there to get the support to jump on these as soon as possible. And so you're talking kind of in some of the extreme cases of maybe some allegations around sexual abuse or some kind of abuse or something like that.
I hate to cut you off, but it's not that extreme. Even a false accusation of marks and bruises, or a false accusation of hit the kid, or tells the child that mommy is evil and grows horns out of her head, and whatever other crap that people can make light of, but still try and really entrench as a narrative. Those things can take root, because then dad is now implanting, not implanting that. Let's change the phraseology. Dad's now doing emotional abuse, doing emotional manipulation. That's a big deal.
That's exactly the point I wanted to make, Will, was that is, and even if it's, so if and my point was going to be, even if it's not the extreme that you were just mentioning as an example, even if something that's maybe more covert, like parental alienation, where they're bad mouthing dad about this or that, and then you hear that back from the kid and they're asking questions, well, why did you do that, dad? That is a red flag that you need to be paying attention to and get in front of immediately, because what you just said about the domino effect is after, okay, so maybe it isn't having an impact this month or in the next month or in 6 months, but what you described was, that becomes a narrative. And then there's a slow documentation, and I hate to say it, there's oftentimes where this is being manipulated. This is being manipulated, and this is consciously, a case is consciously being built against you, and this is part of that case. So men, if you're listening and you hear this language and you hear anything that makes you uncomfortable about the feedback you're getting from your kids, or you're hearing from your wife, that you might not, maybe you're just contemplating it, maybe you're not even into the divorce, pay attention and start to do something about it, because this snowballs really fast, and the system is not set up for you. It's not the civil system or the criminal system, like you said. It's not set up for, and I just had a consultation this morning with a guy who said, this makes no sense to me. I mean, it's really pretty black and white, and I did this and that, and there's no and there's no evidence and this and that. I said, it doesn't matter. It does not matter. That's right. You need to get ahead of this. Right. And so in getting ahead of this, your first step was perfect. Like, pay attention. Then what is a next step when these red flags start getting waved everywhere and you're paying attention to them?
So people's first reaction is to find a lawyer. And I'm not saying they shouldn't, but I am going to say that lawyers understand the court arena. Mm-hmm. I'm going to say that, and this is with all due respect, okay, most lawyers don't understand the arena that I have lived in for the last 15 years.
Well, in particular, family law attorneys.
Yes.
Let's be clear about that, because there's a difference in family law attorneys, and you're talking about getting an attorney that is a family law attorney.
Correct. Or criminal for domestic violence. Either way,
right. Okay.
They think they know, and for the most part, they do in court, but they don't know the child welfare system well or well enough. They don't know how the investigation process goes, not just with child welfare, but with criminal, again, well enough. And so that's where someone who knows how these things go, who knows the step-by-step process, what should happen, and if things aren't following that, what's probably going on, and that there's more red flags going on, you need someone who knows. And to your point in terms of a consult, I had a consult last week, and I can't go into the details of the privacy and whatever in terms of how I hold myself. But long story short is, this person had a agreement from, let's say, 2 or 3 years ago. Both parties now filed again to modify the custody, the amount of custody, sole custody from both parties now instead of 50-50 and whatever else they agreed upon 3 or 4 years ago. Now they both want full custody. They're both going for the jugulars technically, But my client was railroaded for all these years by the kids. The guardian ad litem, according to certain pieces, have sided with the other party and everything else. There's ways to attack it, but the longer you wait, we're not talking about like times 3 or times 4 or times 5, how hard it gets. Exponential. We're talking about like exponents. It gets worse and worse by the day, because first we're talking about the kids who are being sort of brainwashed day by day. We're talking about having to reverse everything, whether if it's the police involved and who they think is right or wrong, or doing right or wrong, or whatever it is, child welfare involved. If there's a guardian ad litem, you have to sort of get information that knocks out the GAL's information, and that's not so easy to do. I'm not going to lie, because judges rely on court-appointed people as sort of third-party empirical. They're going to be impartial, and they aren't. They're human. Okay,
right. And let's emphasize that part too in what you're saying here, Will. Because the court has a limited amount of resources. Right. So the courts get a really bad rap, but the system's not structured efficiently. And so they have their biases. So the court really likes status quo. And so if you don't get ahead of this, in like you're describing with your consult, that this has gone down the road now. The court looks at this, they have a finite amount of resources, being time to look at that. They're gonna rely on these experts to a large extent, and they're gonna go, yeah, it seems to be okay have been working okay right now. Children, and this might seem extreme, the children aren't dying and they're not physically hurt, so let's just keep this going. And we know that that's not necessarily the best thing for the kids, because they're being mentally, emotionally abused by this person, but they've been able to build this case. And as dads, we have not stepped up, and we have not fought for this. And so let's talk more, because I like what you said about not necessarily lawyering up, which it may or may not be the situation. Maybe you do need to, especially if there is a criminal, like a criminal charge or something, you're going to have to. But let's talk about, like, we find somebody that wills, or find therapists that understand parental alienation, and start making the case for yourself and for your family that, okay, this narrative, and it becomes a narrative. This narrative, you're almost I hate using terms of fighting battles, right? Because then that makes a line in the sand. But you are fighting a battle. But let's couch this, or let's frame this in, you're fighting a battle for your children. And what's best for your children. You're not just drawing lines on you're right or she's right, or vice versa. You're fighting for the best interest of your children. And if you don't feel that the narrative that is being told is in the best interest of your children, and that might be that your kids are being, your time is being limited. They're telling you that you're doing something wrong, and you know that you haven't done something wrong. That then you need to be stepping up and fighting, and finding a will, finding a family law attorney, finding a criminal attorney, finding a coach that's going to be out there. It's going to help you mitigate all of these things, finding your own therapist, and then starting with all of that. And man, like, this sounds like a lot, right?
To hear the rest of this episode and access the corresponding resources, visit thedivorcedadvocate.com and become a member of our community. It's free to join and will provide you with the resources you deserve as a divorced or divorcing dad. Thank you for listening. God bless, and I'll talk with you next week.